Picture this, right? It's just 2 days after the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
Oh, man. Yeah.
You are sitting at a dinner table in a Middle Eastern country, and sitting across from you is this incredibly experienced, tough-as-nails senior American diplomat.
Right. A real veteran of the State Department.
Exactly. She's a political appointee. She's got these hard-fought policy achievements to her name. And right in the middle of the conversation, she suddenly just bursts into tears.
It's such a striking image to start with.
It really is.
Just a complete shattering of expectations for someone who had, spent her entire life building that specific global architecture.
Yeah, she was mourning the sudden evaporation of an entire political order. I mean, an order that everyone in the foreign policy establishment had they'd taken it completely for granted up until that very Tuesday.
Oh, absolutely.
And that image, which comes from an essay by David Kilcullen, it just perfectly sets the stage for our deep dive today. We're pulling from this really fascinating stack of essays published in Australian Foreign Affairs between 2018 and 2025.
Which is such a wild period to look back on.
Totally. We are looking at these tectonic shifts in global power dynamics. We're exploring the evolution of U.S. foreign policy, the massive disruption of the America First agenda, and what all of this actually means for key allies trying to navigate a multipolar world.
Because the old maps simply do not work anymore. The fundamental rules of gravity in international relations have just completely shifted.
Right. And for you listening, especially those of you studying international relations right now, our mission today is to cut through the daily political noise and look at the hard strategic realities. How is the U.S. changing as a great power? And how does a middle power like Australia survive in its wake?
It's the defining question of the era, honestly.
It is. Now, just to be totally clear for everyone listening, because, we are diving into deeply polarizing Trump and Biden policies today, our goal here isn't to take a political side.
No, not at all.
We aren't endorsing any of these foreign policies, left or right. We're just looking at the hard data, the military geometry, and the strategic analysis from these source essays to really understand the mechanics of what's actually happening on the ground.
Because understanding the mechanisms at play is, frankly, the only way to survive the shift, regardless of anyone's political affiliation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the first thing we really have to separate is the chaotic style of the Donald Trump administration from the actual substance of U.S. foreign policy.
Right, the style versus the substance.
Yeah, and David Kilcullen gives us this brilliant analogy in his essay to help conceptualize this. He calls it the upside-down duck.
The upside-down duck. I love this analogy. It captures the cognitive dissonance of that era so well.
Walk us through it.
So, if you imagine a duck on a pond, right? Usually the body is gliding smoothly on the surface, looking totally peaceful, while the legs are just paddling frantically underwater.
Yeah, doing all the work.
Exactly. Well, Kilcullen argues the Trump administration was the exact reverse.
So, beneath the water, the actual policy decisions often showed a surprisingly high degree of continuity with previous administrations.
Right. High continuity, low drama.
Like, for example, Trump's strategy in Afghanistan was heavily criticized in the media at the time as this aggressive warmongering. But if you look at the mechanical substance of the policy...
It was almost identical to Joe Biden's 2009 plan.
Yes. It relied on a light military footprint, deploying drones, using special forces, and maintaining this quiet willingness to negotiate with the Taliban. It just had much harsher, bombastic rhetoric layered on top of it.
Or look at the 2015 Iran nuclear deal.
Oh, right.
He decertified it to please his domestic base, but he didn't actually withdraw from it at the time.
And wait, the strategic reason for that restraint is fascinating.
Totally fascinating. Pulling out entirely would have left the actual mechanics of the deal intact for the other signatory nations, right?
Yeah.
The Europeans and everyone else. But it would have completely removed Washington's ability to influence the outcome.
Ah, so you lose your leverage.
Exactly. So the substance remained highly conventional, even highly pragmatic.
But above the water, the duck is thrashing wildly.
Feathers flying everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, the administration was violating long-standing political norms, publicly bullying its own cabinet members. Like, we have the famous incident where Secretary of State Rex Tillerson allegedly called the president a fucking moron.
Right, which you just don't see in standard diplomatic history.
No. And, of course, there was the transactional, almost hostile treatment of historical allies, viewing them basically as financial freeloaders rather than strategic partners.
And this thrashing above the water is what triggered a massive psychological split between different parts of the world, which actually brings up Michael Wesley's theory on how different regions fundamentally misunderstand each other's view of American power.
Okay, lay that out for us.
This is crucial for international relations students to grasp. Western allies, countries like Australia, Canada, the NATO states, they've historically viewed U.S. power in deeply moral terms.
Like viewing America as the indispensable champion of a liberal, rules-based global order.
Yes. And to take that a step further, the West really saw American power as the natural evolution of human progress towards democracy and free markets.
Yeah.
The alliance wasn't just a military pact.
It was a shared moral destiny.
Exactly, a shared moral destiny. So when America First rhetoric emerged and Washington seemingly abandoned that moral arbiter role, Western capitals went into a full-blown panic.
Because to them, it felt like a betrayal of shared foundational values.
Right. But Asian states experienced that exact same rhetoric completely differently. They view U.S. power in purely material terms.
Meaning they don't care about the shared democratic destiny. They just care about the aircraft carriers.
Bingo. They see American power laconically as a cyclical, stabilizing force. It's just a big stick that prevents regional hegemony and allows their own economies to grow. They never bought into the moral romanticism in the first place.
So while Western diplomats were having collective existential crises over the rhetoric like our crying diplomat at the dinner table, Asian governments largely just kept calm and carried on.
They did.
They recognized that U.S. power isn't suddenly disappearing into the ether. It's simply shifting its operating model. It's now serving direct transactional U.S. interests rather than upholding a global moral framework.
Because they're entirely used to great powers acting like self-interested great powers. It is the historical norm.
Which provides the perfect conceptual bridge to our next major question. If the U.S. is shedding its role as the global moral crusader and acting out of sheer material self-interest, how is its military strategy actually adapting to the material reality of a rising China?
That is the big one.
Because, the media loves to slap the label New Cold War on this rivalry. But I want to push back on that narrative. If this is truly Cold War 2.0, why hasn't the U.S. launched a massive Truman-style global crusade against Beijing? Where is the sweeping new containment doctrine?
Well, the analogy to the Soviet Union completely fails the moment you look at the raw economic mechanics.
Right?
Sam Roggeveen argues in his essay that the reason America won't fight a traditional Cold War against China is simple. The job is too big and the stakes are too small.
Yeah, you can't bankrupt a country that makes up over 16% of global output without bankrupting yourself in the process.
Exactly.
During the Cold War, the U.S. could simply outspend the Soviets. Today, China is so deeply integrated into global supply chains that an economic decoupling is mutually assured destruction.
Furthermore, consider the military geometry. China focuses its military power almost entirely on its own region, the first island chain, the South China Sea.
It's all highly concentrated.
Right. The U.S., conversely, spreads its forces globally to maintain its superpower status. So if the U.S. builds a new aircraft carrier, China can just build 3 advanced anti-ship missile systems much closer to their own shores for a fraction of the cost.
So how does Washington adapt? They can't fight everywhere, they can't afford total containment, and they really don't want to spark World War III over a regional dispute.
What's fascinating here is that Brendan Taylor suggests the U.S. is inevitably returning to a 1950s Cold War strategy originally devised by Dean Acheson.
Acheson. Okay, what's the strategy?
It's known as building situations of strength. The underlying logic here is that you do not try to project power equally everywhere. You identify specific geographic areas where you already hold overwhelming institutional and military power, like the alliances with Japan and South Korea.
And you just double down on them.
Exactly, you double down. But conversely, you have to cold-bloodedly recognize your situations of weakness.
Right, places where the U.S. is currently overextended, outmatched, or where the sheer tyranny of distance makes supply lines impossible to maintain, like the deep waters of the South China Sea or potentially the Taiwan Strait.
Yes. The strategic imperative for Washington is to pull back slightly, solidify those footholds of absolute strength, and avoid getting dragged into a devastating, unwinnable conflict in areas of structural weakness.
Which makes sense.
But because the U.S. needs to solidify that strength without bankrupting its own treasury, it is turning to its oldest, most reliable allies to shoulder a massive part of the geographical burden.
And here's where it gets really interesting for Australia. Because looking at a map of the Indo-Pacific, Australia is positioned perfectly for this new strategy. James Curran calls it the continental gift.
A continental gift.
Essentially, Australia is handing over its vast geography to U.S. war planners.
It is a profound shift in force posture. We're not just talking about joint military exercises or intelligence sharing anymore.
No, we are talking about transforming an entire continent into a distributed military launch pad. You have B-52 strategic bombers rotating through RAAF base Tyndall up in the north. You've got thousands of U.S. Marines stationed in Darwin. You have proposed logistics, fuel reserves, and manufacturing hubs stretching all the way down to Perth in the south. The Pentagon essentially views Australia in three distinct, highly functional zones.
Right. A northern zone for rapid force projection, a central zone for logistics and staging, and a southern zone for protected industrial production.
From Washington's perspective, it is the ultimate situation of strength.
Oh, without a doubt. It provides an entire continent operating as a secure sanctuary that sits just outside the immediate range of most of China's mid-range conventional missiles.
But still close enough to strike back.
Exactly.
But hold on, let me push back on this strategy for a second. If I'm an Australian policymaker looking at this map, turning my country into a massive U.S. staging ground sounds like a terrifying idea. Doesn't hosting the bombers inherently invite the missiles?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. I mean, by providing the launch pad, aren't we turning ourselves into a massive, unavoidable target?
That is the exact targeting dilemma highlighted by analysts like Raghaveen and Felicity Ruby. Historically, Australia was a niche contributor to U.S. wars. The country sent specialized troops to Korea, Vietnam, Iraq.
Sure.
But the homeland itself was largely treated as a sanctuary, far away from the front lines. Now, the mechanics of modern warfare have changed that. By hosting B-52s, which could theoretically be tasked with striking China's nuclear infrastructure or naval command centers, Australia drastically erodes its strategic ambiguity.
And it isn't just the physical bombers parked on the tarmac, it's the intelligence architecture, too.
Oh, absolutely. The Joint Defence Facility at Pine Gap in central Australia is the linchpin here. It's often described mildly in the press as a listening post, but that severely underplays its function.
Yeah, it's way more than a listening post.
Pine Gap provides real-time targeting data for U.S. drone strikes and early warning telemetry for ballistic missiles. It is deeply, inextricably integrated into U.S. nuclear war planning. And Ruby points out that in a major regional conflict, these bases wouldn't just be unfortunate collateral damage. They would be primary, high-value targets for preemptive strikes.
Because if an adversary feels existentially threatened by bombers or submarines operating out of Australia, basic military logic dictates they must strike those command and control facilities first to blind the U.S. military.
Exactly.
So Australia is accepting an enormous amount of sovereign risk here. We are putting a giant geopolitical bullseye right on our own back. The only way a nation accepts that level of existential risk is if the payoff is an absolute ironclad guarantee of defense. Which conceptually brings us to the psychology behind AUKUS.
The submarine deal that fundamentally reshaped the strategic architecture and the defense budgets of the Indo-Pacific.
Right. Under Pillar 1 of AUKUS, Australia is slated to purchase between 3 and 5 Virginia-class nuclear-powered attack submarines from the United States. To put this in perspective, it's like paying billions of dollars up front for a luxury car, but the dealer's contract explicitly states that they only might deliver it to you in 10 years. And even then, only provided they don't need to drive it themselves.
It's actually worse than that, honestly. It's paying billions for the luxury car, building a massive, highly specialized garage for it in your own house, and then realizing the dealer is legally forbidden by Congress from giving you the keys if his own family needs a ride.
Wow.
Former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has been fiercely critical of the assumptions underlying this deal, specifically because of the sheer mathematics of the U.S. defense industrial base. The U.S. Navy is currently facing a massive structural production shortfall. They're already 17 submarines short of their own baseline strategic requirement.
Wait, 17, so they literally cannot build enough boats to cover their own global patrols, let alone export them.
Exactly. And the specific U.S. legislation enabling AUKUS dictates a very strict mechanism. The president must certify to Congress 270 days before any transfer takes place that selling these specific submarines to Australia will not degrade U.S. naval capabilities.
Okay, let's run a scenario on that. If we connect this to the bigger picture, imagine we are in the early 2030s. Tensions in the Taiwan Strait are at a boiling point. A naval blockade is imminent, and submarines are the only assets capable of breaking a blockade undetected.
Which is a very realistic scenario.
Right. The U.S. Navy is staring down a potential conflict. What are the odds that an America First president, a president whose entire worldview is built on transactional self-interest and domestic strength, is going to hand over their most valuable, most survivable, and highly scarce military assets to a foreign country?
The Congressional Research Service itself notes that it is highly unlikely. The entire risk of an American president concluding that the needs of the U.S. Navy come first is borne solely by Australia.
That's incredible.
The alternative outcome, which the U.S. Congress has quietly flagged in its reports, is a division of labor. In this scenario, Australia doesn't actually get to own the submarines. Instead, Australia simply pays to upgrade its own ports to host U.S.-owned submarines.
Further cementing its status as a forward operating base rather than an independent military actor.
Precisely.
That is a profound level of sovereign dependency. We are essentially outsourcing our ultimate defense capability to the domestic political whims of a highly polarized Washington. So, if I'm a foreign leader or, a middle power looking at this volatility, my instinct is just to put my head down, agree to whatever Washington wants, and pray I don't lose my nuclear umbrella.
That is exactly the instinct that many leaders had, and it is what Emma Shortis describes in her essay as the desperate scramble.
Oh, I call this the daddy issues framework.
Daddy issues framework, right?
It's the deep-seated anxiety of constantly trying to please an unpredictable, overpowering protector, because the entire diplomatic core of these middle powers was trained in the post-WWI moral order. When that moral certainty vanishes, they just default to appeasement.
It's panic.
Total panic. Shortis paints this vivid, almost painful picture of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau going down to Mar-a-Lago right after the 2024 election. Trudeau was trying to stave off a catastrophic 25% blanket tariff that would devastate the Canadian economy. So he goes to dinner.
And how did that go?
Well, he has to sit there while Trump plays DJ on his iPad, literally pausing conversation to make Trudeau listen to Pavarotti hitting a high note.
Oh, wow. It is the theatrical performance of submission.
Totally. Trudeau has to sit there and endure Trump joking about making Canada the 51st state, all to try and win a carve-out, a special favor, and he leaves with absolute no guarantees. It's just scrambling for scraps of benevolence from a bully.
And that contrasts so sharply with the second strategy we see in the sources, advocated by Malcolm Turnbull, based on his own firsthand experience.
Right.
Turnbull argues that flattering a transactional bully is the worst possible approach you can take. His axiom is, the bully despises those people he suborns while he respects those he cannot.
He actually bypassed the moral arguments entirely, didn't he? And just spoke the language of leverage.
He did. The sources detail a highly contentious phone call early in Trump's first term. Australia had a deal with the outgoing Obama administration regarding refugee resettlement.
Right, the refugee swap.
Yeah. And Trump hated the deal. He felt it made him look weak and wanted to scrap it immediately. But Turnbull didn't grovel or talk about historical friendships or shared values. He framed it in terms a businessman would understand.
Smart.
He told the president he was like a new CEO inheriting a bad contract from his predecessor. You can complain about it, you can hate it, but you have to honor it, or your word in future business deals means absolutely nothing.
And Trump was apparently furious. He called it the most unpleasant call he'd had all day, but he honored the deal because the psychological mechanism of the argument actually worked.
Yes, and the exact same dynamic played out with steel and aluminum tariffs. Turnbull didn't beg for an exemption based on shared democratic values. He brought a balance sheet.
The math.
The math. He put it the hard numbers. The U.S. had a $25 billion trade surplus with Australia. The mechanism of his argument was pure business logic. Imposing tariffs on your most profitable trading partner is just bad business. It hurts the bottom line.
And Australia got the exemption?
They got the exemption.
That is fascinating. The mechanism of leverage over a transactional leader isn't morality, it's math. Shortis also points to Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum. When threatened with those exact same tariffs that sent Trudeau scrambling down to Mar-a-Lago, Sheinbaum just refused to go.
Good for her.
She firmly stated that a trade war helps no one, pointed out the economic integration of their supply chains, and just stood her ground.
And the analytical takeaway for students here is that unconditional subordination does not guarantee security in a multipolar world. Whether it's Turnbull leveraging business logic or Shortis advocating for deeper solidarity with Pacific nations and civil society rather than obsessing over the White House, the consensus is clear. Middle powers must aggressively project their own agency.
So what does this all mean? For the international relations students listening, your core tension is this. Middle powers like Australia are caught in a brutal vice. On one side, you have deep historical, cultural, and institutional loyalty to the United States. On the other side, you have the inescapable, hard geographic reality of living in an Asia whose economy and military landscape is increasingly dominated by China.
The crucial realization you must take away is that the rules-based order you've studied in your textbooks is no longer a moral given. We have entered a highly transactional multipolar environment where American power is returning to a form of pragmatic imperial self-interest.
A whole new
It
ballgame.
is. In this environment, relying entirely on the benevolence of a distant superpower is a massive gamble. Middle powers must fiercely and unsentimentally calculate and guard their own sovereign interests.
Which leaves us with a massive scenario to debate in your next seminar. Throughout this deep dive, we've focused heavily on the incredible risks of leaning too far into the U.S. alliance, the risk of becoming a primary nuclear target, the risk of sovereign dependency with AUKUS. But consider the inverse. What happens to the Indo-Pacific architecture if an America First administration decides tomorrow that the region is simply too expensive to maintain and abruptly and entirely withdraws its military presence?
It would create an immediate, terrifying vacuum of power.
Who fills that vacuum and how quickly does the current peace unravel? It brings us right back to that senior American diplomat crying at the dinner table. She was weeping for an order that is gone. We don't have the luxury of crying over it. We have to figure out how to survive whatever comes next.